Hi everyone, this is Lomi, and this week I'm making a more fantasy-styled vest for my SID guy Vahn. After I made a vest for Arios, I felt like Vahn wasn't getting much attention, so here we go. This vest is a little more fitted. Since it's more of a fantasy kind of waistcoat thing, the fabric I'm using is pretty busy, so I'll show the garment construction using the lining. I'm using lightweight satin for the lining. I start with the front. The front is two pieces, and the construction might not be totally obvious. The two pieces go together with right sides together. The curve that creates the bottom of the armhole on the front side panel should initially point toward the straight front edge of the larger front piece. You'll notice this side front panel goes pretty high up, so when it folds over for the top of this L-shaped seam to be finished, there will be enough fabric for the pieces to be sewn together. When sewing these pieces together, the seam shouldn't go all the way to the top of the side panel. Instead, you'll stop about 1/4 of an inch down from the top edge. That way, when we turn the fabric and pin it in place to create that upside down L-shaped seam, we'll have that 1/4 inch seam allowance to sew these edges together that we need. You may need to clip the corner to help the fabric turn. Once you sew this seam and turn the fabric to the right side, you'll see the corner this creates in the front of the vest, which helps it fit nicely to the contour of the doll's body. My lining isn't quite smooth, which means I need to clip the corner a little more deeply to get it to lay flat. This shaped front is a popular style in a lot of fantasy artwork, and I've always really liked it. The other half of the front goes together the same way, just in a mirror image. When running these seams, make sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end so your seams won't pull apart at the ends or in that corner on the front. Next, we'll sew the curved back side panel to the back center panel. Once again, put the fabric with right sides together, pin your pieces, and sew. Since this is a really shaped and fitted piece, you'll want to go slow and make sure the fabric is perfectly smooth under your machine's foot. In the end, you'll have 1/2 of the back. Put the other side together the same way. Here it's important to notice the center back panels are a little longer than the curved side pieces, which means you'll want to begin pinning at the armhole and work your way down. The center back has a longer tail to make it easier to finish the garment later on. Once both halves of the back are sewn, put them together with right sides together. Pin the straight center seam together and sew it shut, backstitching at the beginning and end. To finish the lining, put the back and front pieces together with right sides together and then pin them at the shoulder. Sew both shoulders together, backstitching at the beginning and end of the seam, and then the lining is complete. Clip your threads and we'll move on to the outer shell. The fabric outer shell goes together the same way as the lining, but as you can see, the fabric I'm using is a really busy metallic brocade. It's kind of hard to see how these pieces go together, which is why I used the boring white lining to show the garment construction. This is my first time sewing with metallic brocade, but I've used satin brocades before and they're pretty similar. You want to sew using a really sharp needle, and it's a good idea to use pinking shears on the edges, because this material frays like crazy. But look how beautiful it's going to be and how smoothly it goes together. I'll just run through the construction of this, both front and back, really quickly. While I'm here, I want to express a big thank you to my supporters on Patreon, who help make these tutorials possible. Without your support, I'd never be able to do as much as I do, so thank you all so much. Once the fabric of the outer shell is sewn together, I embellish the front a little by putting a little white trim along the front seam. I had originally planned to use silver, but then the fabric was silver and it was just too much. I streamed this project live when I was filming, and the watchers preferred the white trim, so white it is. I sew this on my machine, but it's really hard to keep it where I want it. So after this trim is done, I decide I'll add the rest by hand at the end. So the next step is to put the lining and the outer shell together with right sides together and pin it shut around the armholes, around the neck, and down the front edges. My vest is looking a little poofy right now because this metallic fabric is really delicate and finicky. So instead of ironing it, I'll wash and steam it later to make the seams lay flat. If you're using a more agreeable fabric, you can iron your lining and outer shell before doing this part. It'll give you a cleaner result at the end. Sew around both armholes, backstitching at the beginning and end. Then sew up one side of the front, around the neckline, and back down the other side of the front. This leaves the sides and bottom edge of the garment open. Once these seams are done, turn the garment right side out by pulling the front sides through the 2 layers of fabric at the shoulder. Make sure your corners are turned neatly, then we'll close the sides. The sides go together by matching up the fabric to itself and the lining to itself underneath the armhole on one side. This will be sewn shut in one seam, which closes the bottom of the armhole too. The end result should look like this. Repeat the process for the other side, pinning the fabric outer shell to itself and lining to itself, and then sewing it closed. To finish the construction, the finished top part of the vest is tucked to the inside, and the bottom edge is folded up around it so they can be pinned closed. Here you'll sew both sides, from the edge to the longer centerpiece, stopping at its edge and backstitching to finish the seam. This leaves this center section with the long tails of fabric open. Clip all remaining threads, then pull the vest right side out through this hole. Leaving the longer tail on this fabric piece allows me to do this without worrying about the delicate brocade fabric shredding and leaving me with an ugly hem. At this point, you want to make sure all the corners are turned neatly. We'll finish the garment by tucking the long fabric tails to the inside and pinning the bottom closed, then sewing it shut by hand with a hidden stitch, also known as a ladder stitch or an invisible stitch. This is done by sliding the needle through the folded edge of the lining, then the outer shell, then the lining, alternating back and forth until it's completely closed with an invisible seam. Last of all, I stitch on some more white trim around the neckline and down the front edge, and then sew hook and eye closures on the inside of the front edge. After it's washed and steamed, this is the end result. It ended up being a little more festive than I expected, so now I'm kind of inspired to make blue and silver winter outfits for my dolls. Like I have time for that, right? And that's all for today. If you enjoyed this tutorial, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss future tutorials and free patterns. Thanks for watching. Bye.